The world knew Clive Davis as the genius who discovered Whitney Houston. But what they didn't know was that in 1992, he almost destroyed her career with one word. No, the song was perfect. Whitney knew it in her bones. But Clive Davis, the man who had shaped every decision of her career, the mentor she had never questioned, looked her straight in the eye and said it would ruin everything they had built. What happened next in that private recording studio would change not just Whitney's life, but the entire landscape of popular music. This is the story of the moment Whitney Houston chose her voice over her mentor's vision, and why that decision almost cost her everything she had worked for. If you're ready to discover the hidden power struggle that created one of the greatest performances in music history, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because this story will show you what happens when artistic vision collides with commercial control, and one woman's courage rewrites the rules. Let's dive into the song that Clive Davis said would end Whitney's career. It was February 1992, and Whitney Houston was at an impossible crossroads. The Bodyguard movie was in production, and she was supposed to deliver the soundtrack that would define her transition from music superstar to Hollywood actress. Everything was riding on this moment. Her acting debut, her continued relevance in an industry that was shifting toward grunge and hip-hop, and her ability to prove she was more than just a beautiful voice taking direction from men in suits. Whitney had been in the music industry since she was 19 years old, and for 13 years, she had followed Clive Davis's instructions without question. He had discovered her singing in a New York nightclub in 1983, and he had carefully constructed her image, her sound, and her trajectory from gospel-trained church girl to pop royalty. Every song Whitney had recorded, every album she had released, every decision about her career had been filtered through Clive's vision, and it had worked brilliantly. Whitney's debut album had sold 25 million copies worldwide. Her second album had produced 4 consecutive #1 singles. She had become the voice of a generation, the girl next door with the voice of an angel. But there was a cost to that success that most people never saw. Whitney wasn't making creative decisions. She was executing someone else's artistic vision. And by 1992, that arrangement was beginning to suffocate her. The tension had been building for months before that fateful meeting. Whitney's personal life was becoming increasingly complicated. Her marriage to Bobby Brown was already showing signs of the dysfunction that would eventually consume both of them. The media was beginning to question her authenticity, with whispers that she was too polished, too produced, too controlled by the white executives at Arista Records. The criticism stung because there was truth in it. Whitney had been shaped and molded into a product that would appeal to the widest possible audience. And in the process, she had lost connection with the raw gospel passion that had made her special in the first place. Her mother, Sissy Houston, had warned her about this years earlier. "Baby, don't let them turn you into something you're not," Sissy had said during one of their increasingly rare private conversations. "Your gift came from God, not from Clive Davis." But Whitney had ignored those warnings because Clive's formula was working. Or at least it had been working until everything started changing. The early 90s brought a seismic shift in popular music. Nirvana's Nevermind had exploded onto the scene, bringing raw emotion and authenticity back into mainstream music. Hip-hop was asserting itself as a dominant cultural force. And suddenly, Whitney's perfectly polished pop ballads felt dated and out of touch. That's when Whitney discovered the song. It wasn't even meant for her. I Will Always Love You was a Dolly Parton country song from 1974, a simple acoustic ballad about love and letting go. The music director for The Bodyguard, David Foster, had suggested it as a possibility for the soundtrack, but nobody took it seriously at first. It was too country, too simple, too far outside Whitney's established style. But when Whitney heard Dolly's original version late one night in her home studio, something clicked. This wasn't just another love song. It was a song about choosing yourself, about walking away from something you love because staying would destroy you both. It was about dignity in departure, about loving someone enough to let them go. Whitney saw herself in every line. Her relationship with Bobby was already showing signs of the toxicity that would define it. Her relationship with Clive was becoming increasingly strained as she pushed for more creative control. Her relationship with her own identity was fractured by years of playing the role that other people had written for her. I Will Always Love You wasn't just a song. It was a statement, a declaration of independence wrapped in a love ballad. And Whitney knew that if she could sing it her way, not the safe, polished way Clive would demand, but with all the raw gospel power she had been taught to suppress, it could be extraordinary. She spent 3 weeks working on the arrangement in secret. Whitney knew that if she presented Clive with just the idea, he would shut it down immediately. She needed to show him what the song could be, to make him hear the vision she could see so clearly in her mind. She recruited a small team of trusted collaborators. David Foster agreed to work on the arrangement, intrigued by Whitney's passion for the project. Her vocal coach, Gary Katona, helped her develop the approach that would showcase the full power of her voice. They worked late at night in private studios, keeping the project hidden from Arista Records and from Clive's watchful eye. The arrangement Whitney created was unlike anything she had ever recorded. It started quiet and intimate, just her voice and minimal instrumentation, building slowly through the verses before exploding into a gospel-powered climax that would showcase the full 4-octave range of her voice. It was risky, unconventional, and completely outside the formula that had made her successful. When the arrangement was finally ready, Whitney knew she had to present it to Clive before word leaked out that she was working on unapproved material. She scheduled a private meeting at his office, just the two of them, and brought a demo recording of what she had created. That meeting would change everything. Clive Davis's office at Arista Records was legendary in the music industry. The walls were covered with platinum albums and photographs of the artists he had discovered and developed. Whitney, Aretha Franklin, Barry Manilow, countless others. He sat behind his massive desk like a king on a throne, and when Whitney walked in carrying her demo tape, she felt like a subject requesting an audience. "Whitney, darling," Clive said with his characteristic polish. "What's this mysterious project you needed to discuss so urgently?" Whitney took a breath and explained the concept. The Bodyguard soundtrack needed something unexpected, something that would showcase her voice in a way people had never heard before. She wanted to record "I Will Always Love You" as the film's love theme. Clive listened patiently, his face revealing nothing. Then Whitney played the demo. For 4 minutes and 31 seconds. Her voice filled that office with a power and emotion that she had never been allowed to display on her previous records. The song built from whisper-quiet verses to a soaring, gospel-inflected climax that was pure church, pure soul, pure Whitney Houston without any commercial calculation diluting the raw emotion. When the song ended, there was a long silence. Clive Davis looked at Whitney with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't pride or excitement. It was disappointment bordering on anger. "No," he said simply. "Absolutely not." Whitney felt her stomach drop. She had expected resistance, but the flatness of his rejection was shocking. "Clive, if you just listen to how the bridge works into the final chorus, I don't need to listen again," Clive interrupted, his tone sharpening. "Whitney, I've been in this business for 30 years. I know what works and what doesn't, and this doesn't work." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. "Do you know why you're successful? Because we've been very careful about your image, your sound, your brand. We've positioned you as sophisticated, elegant, accessible. This," he gestured dismissively at the tape player, "this is too raw, too gospel, too black." The last 2 words hung in the air like a slap. Whitney felt anger rising in her chest. "Too black? What does that even mean?" Clive turned to face her, his expression cold. "It means that your crossover appeal is what makes you valuable. The suburban moms who buy your albums, the middle America radio stations that play your songs, they're buying Whitney Houston, the classy pop star. They're not buying a gospel belter who sounds like she belongs in a church in Newark." "That's who I am," Whitney said quietly. "I am a gospel belter from church in Newark. That's where my voice came from." Clive's response was brutal in its honesty. "Your voice came from Sissy Houston and your God-given talent. Your career came from me and the decisions I've made to package that talent in a way that the widest possible audience can consume. Don't confuse the two." He walked back to his desk and sat down, his tone softening slightly. "Whitney, I understand you're feeling creatively restrained. Every artist goes through this. But you need to trust the process that has made you one of the biggest stars in the world. This Dolly Parton song is wrong for you in every way. It's too country, it's too old-fashioned, and your arrangement makes it too aggressive. It will alienate your core audience, and it won't attract enough new listeners to compensate. Whitney felt tears of frustration beginning to form. So what do you suggest for the soundtrack? Clive pulled out a folder. I've had our A&R team working on some options. There's a beautiful ballad by Diane Warren that's perfect for you. Safe, elegant, exactly what your audience expects. That's what you should record. For 13 years, this was the moment where Whitney would have nodded, thanked Clive for his wisdom, and done exactly what he suggested. But something had shifted inside her during those 3 weeks of working on I Will Always Love You in secret. She had remembered what it felt like to sing with complete freedom, to use her voice the way it was meant to be used, without calculation or compromise. I'm recording the song, Whitney said, her voice steady. Clive's eyes widened in surprise. In their entire professional relationship, Whitney had never directly contradicted him. Excuse me? I'm recording I Will Always Love You for the Bodyguard soundtrack. With the arrangement I created. I'm telling you this out of respect, but I'm not asking for permission. The air in the office became electric with tension. Clive stood up slowly, his face flushed. Whitney, if you defy me on this, there will be consequences. I can't stop you from recording whatever you want for the movie soundtrack, but I control what gets released through Arista Records. I control your album releases, your radio promotion, your entire music career. Then I guess we'll find out what happens when the song gets released through the movie, Whitney replied. Because I'm doing this, Clive, with or without your support. What happened next revealed just how deep the power struggle between them had become. Clive picked up the phone on his desk. Get legal on the line. I want to review Whitney's contract immediately, specifically the sections dealing with soundtrack contributions and approval authority. Whitney stood up. You're threatening me with lawyers? After everything we've built together? Clive's response was cold and calculated. I'm protecting an investment. You seem to forget that Arista Records has spent millions developing your career. You don't get to throw that away on a vanity project because you're having some kind of artistic identity crisis. This isn't a vanity project, Whitney said, her voice rising. This is me finally using my voice the way it was meant to be used. This is me making a decision about my own artistry instead of just being your pretty puppet. My puppet. Clive laughed bitterly. My puppet who has sold 50 million albums? My puppet who has won multiple Grammys? My puppet who makes millions of dollars because of the decisions I've made. Yes, Whitney said simply. Your puppet. Because none of those decisions were mine. I've been singing the songs you chose with the producers you hired, creating the image you designed. And I'm grateful for everything you've done, Clive. Truly. But I'm 31 years old, and I've never made a single creative decision about my own career. That ends now. The meeting ended with both of them angry and neither willing to back down. Clive made it clear that if Whitney recorded the song, he would do everything in his power to minimize its impact. No radio promotion through Arista channels. No music video budget. No inclusion on her next album. He would treat it as a contractual obligation for the movie soundtrack and nothing more. Whitney walked out of that office, knowing she had just blown up the most important professional relationship of her life. But she also felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt free. The recording session for I Will Always Love You took place 3 days later. The atmosphere in the studio was tense because everyone knew about the conflict with Clive Davis. David Foster was nervous about his role in what was being seen as Whitney's rebellion. The session musicians were professional but cautious, aware that they were participating in something that could either be brilliant or career-ending. Whitney walked into the vocal booth, carrying all the emotion of the previous weeks. The frustration with Clive, the pain of her deteriorating marriage, the anger at being controlled for so long, and underneath it all, the pure joy of finally being allowed to sing with complete freedom. Let's do this in one take, Whitney said through the talkback system. I don't want to overthink it. I just want to feel it. What happened over the next 4 minutes and 31 seconds would become legendary in music history. Whitney started the song almost whispering, her voice intimate and vulnerable in a way that radio-friendly Whitney Houston had never been allowed to sound. She lingered on the opening lines, singing with the kind of emotional nakedness that made everyone in the control room hold their breath. Then came the build. Slowly, carefully, Whitney let her voice grow stronger through each verse. The arrangement supported her perfectly, adding layers of instrumentation as her vocal power increased. By the time she reached the bridge, something magical was happening. This wasn't pop music anymore. This wasn't even really a love song anymore. This was a spiritual experience, a woman using her God-given voice to declare her independence, her pain, and her strength all at once. And then came the final chorus. Whitney opened her voice completely, letting loose the full 4-octave gospel power that she had been taught to restrain for commercial audiences. The notes she hit on I in the final, "and I will always love you," seemed to go on forever, a sustained moment of pure vocal athleticism and emotional release that made David Foster actually stand up from the mixing board in shock. When the song ended, there was complete silence in the studio. Then Whitney's voice came through the talkback, small and uncertain. "Was that okay? Should we do another take?" David Foster pressed the button to respond, and his voice was shaking. "Whitney, that was the most extraordinary vocal performance I've ever witnessed. We're not doing another take. That was perfect." Whitney came out of the vocal booth with tears streaming down her face. "I've never sung like that before. I've never been allowed to." "Well, you just changed music," Foster replied. "Clive Davis is going to lose his mind when he hears this." "Good," Whitney said with a small smile. "It's about time." The Bodyguard soundtrack was released in November 1992. True to his word, Clive Davis provided no promotional support for "I Will Always Love You" through Arista Records. There was no radio campaign, no music video initially, nothing that would normally accompany a Whitney Houston single release. The song was simply included on the soundtrack and released to movie theaters as part of the film. And then something extraordinary happened that proved Whitney right and Clive wrong. The song exploded organically, spreading through word of mouth and radio stations that played it in response to listener demand rather than label promotion. "I Will Always Love You" entered the Billboard Hot 100 at number 47 in its first week, despite having no official promotional campaign. The following week it jumped to number 11. The week after that it hit number 1, where it would remain for 14 consecutive weeks, becoming one of the longest-running number 1 singles in history. The power of Whitney's vocal performance was undeniable. This wasn't a carefully calculated pop hit. This was raw talent and emotion breaking through every commercial barrier that had been placed around it. Radio stations that normally wouldn't play a 4-minute and 31-second ballad made exceptions because listeners were calling in and demanding to hear it. The song crossed every demographic boundary. Pop stations played it. R&B stations played it. Adult contemporary played it. Even country stations played it because Dolly Parton's name was attached. Whitney had been right. The song's power came from its authenticity, not from its commercial calculation. And audiences responded to that authenticity in a way they hadn't responded to her previous, more carefully crafted hits. The success forced Clive Davis to make a choice. He could continue to withhold support from the song and look like a fool as it dominated the charts without his help, or he could publicly get behind it and try to take credit for its success. Being Clive Davis, he chose the latter. Within a month of the song's release, Arista Records rushed out a music video, launched a full promotional campaign, and began taking credit for discovering and producing yet another Whitney Houston smash hit. Clive even began telling interviewers that he had known from the beginning that the song would be special. Whitney, in interviews, was diplomatic but firm. "Clive Davis has been an important mentor in my career," she would say carefully. "But I Will Always Love You was something I had to fight for. It represents me finally trusting my own artistic instincts." Behind the scenes, the relationship between Whitney and Clive was permanently altered. They would continue to work together because they were contractually bound, but the dynamic had shifted. Whitney had proven that her instincts could be trusted, that her voice was powerful enough to transcend the commercial calculations that had shaped her career. "I Will Always Love You" became the best-selling single by a female artist in history. It sold more than 20 million copies worldwide. It won Grammy Awards, American Music Awards, and countless other accolades. The Bodyguard soundtrack became the best-selling soundtrack of all time, moving 45 million copies globally. But more important than the commercial success was what the song represented. It was proof that authentic artistry could achieve commercial success, that audiences were hungry for real emotion rather than calculated pop confection. It was validation that Whitney's instincts about her own voice and her own artistry were correct. The song also changed the landscape for other artists, particularly women of color, in pop music. Whitney had proven that you didn't have to choose between commercial success and artistic authenticity. You didn't have to sand down your rough edges or hide your gospel roots or compromise your power to achieve mainstream acceptance. The impact extended beyond music. I Will Always Love You became a cultural touchstone, a song played at weddings and funerals, during moments of celebration and moments of grief. It transcended its origins as a movie soundtrack song to become something universal. But the cost of Whitney's victory was steep. Her relationship with Clive never fully recovered from their confrontation. While they maintained a professional partnership, the trust and mentorship that had defined their early years was gone. Clive became more controlling in other areas, trying to reassert his authority. Whitney became more rebellious, making choices that were sometimes self-destructive just to prove she couldn't be controlled. The success of I Will Always Love You gave Whitney the confidence to assert herself creatively, but didn't give her the tools to handle the other pressures in her life. Her marriage to Bobby Brown continued to deteriorate. Her struggles with substance abuse, which had begun years earlier, intensified. Some people close to Whitney believe that standing up to Clive Davis awakened something in her, a refusal to be controlled that extended beyond just artistic decisions into a general resistance to any kind of authority or structure. After I Will Always Love You, Whitney couldn't be managed anymore, one former assistant said. She had tasted real freedom, and she wanted it in every area of her life, even when it was destroying her. The irony is that the song that represented Whitney finally choosing herself, finally trusting her own voice, also marked the beginning of the period where she lost control of almost everything else. Clive Davis would later admit he was wrong about the song. In his 2013 memoir, published 4 years after Whitney's death, Clive wrote about the I Will Always Love You conflict with unusual candor. I was trying to protect Whitney from what I perceived as a career-damaging decision. But I was wrong. Whitney's instincts about that song were right, and mine were wrong. It's one of the few times in my career where an artist's vision proved superior to my own. But he also defended his overall approach to managing Whitney's career. My job was to help her achieve the widest possible success, and the formula we used for her first several albums accomplished that goal. I Will Always Love You succeeded because it came after we had already established her as a superstar. Without that foundation, the song might not have had the impact it did. It's a self-serving argument, but there's some truth to it. Whitney's ability to take creative risks was built on the commercial success that Clive's careful management had created. The question that can never be answered is what Whitney's career would have looked like if she had been given creative freedom from the beginning. Would she have achieved the same level of success? Would she have made different choices in her personal life? Would she still be alive today? Dolly Parton, who wrote the original song, was thrilled by Whitney's version. When I first heard Whitney was going to record my song, I was honored, Dolly said in interviews. But when I actually heard what she did with it, I was blown away. She took my little country song and turned it into something epic. And the best part is, she made enough money from that song for me to buy Graceland. The relationship between Dolly and Whitney became warm and mutually respectful. Two women from very different musical backgrounds who understood the challenges of being powerful women in an industry controlled by men. Whitney had to fight for that song, Dolly later revealed. She told me that her record label didn't want her to do it, that they thought it was wrong for her. But she fought for it anyway, and that's why it's so powerful. You can hear her fighting in every note she sings. That observation cuts to the heart of why I Will Always Love You resonates so deeply. It's not just a love song. It's a declaration of independence, wrapped in a ballad. Every note Whitney sang was her saying to Clive Davis, to the music industry, to everyone who had tried to control her, I will always love you, but I'm choosing myself. The legacy of that one decision continues to ripple through music. When Beyoncé fought with her father and former manager, Matthew Knowles, for creative control of her career, she cited Whitney's stand against Clive Davis as inspiration. When Adele insisted on recording the James Bond theme, Skyfall, against label resistance, she referenced Whitney's I Will Always Love You as proof that artist instinct sometimes trumps commercial calculation. When Lady Gaga pushed back against her label's attempts to make her more conventional, her team pointed to Whitney's biggest hit as evidence that authenticity sells. The song that Clive Davis said would ruin Whitney's career instead became the template for how artists could achieve massive success by trusting their own creative vision. It proved that audiences were sophisticated enough to embrace complexity, power, and raw emotion rather than just consuming carefully packaged pop products. But the story also serves as a cautionary tale about the cost of standing up to powerful institutions. Whitney won the battle over "I Will Always Love You," but the war for control of her life and career continued for the rest of her too short time on Earth. When Whitney Houston died in 2012, she was 48 years old. Her death was ruled an accidental drowning, with heart disease and cocaine use listed as contributing factors. The world mourned the loss of one of the greatest voices in music history, and tributes poured in from every corner of the entertainment industry. Clive Davis had organized a pre-Grammy gala at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Beverly Hills for the night after Whitney died. He made the controversial decision to continue with the party despite her death, claiming it's what Whitney would have wanted. During his remarks that evening, Clive spoke about Whitney with genuine emotion. "She was my greatest discovery," he said, his voice breaking, "and my greatest heartbreak. I loved her like a daughter, and I tried to protect her, sometimes from herself." What Clive didn't say, but what everyone in that room understood, was that the relationship between mentor and artist is complicated, often painful, and sometimes destructive even when it comes from a place of genuine care. Clive had tried to protect Whitney by controlling her. Whitney had tried to save herself by breaking free. And in the end, neither approach was enough to prevent the tragedy that unfolded. The question that haunts everyone who knew Whitney is whether things could have been different. If Clive had supported her creative vision from the beginning instead of fighting it, would she have developed better instincts about other areas of her life? If Whitney had maintained the structure and discipline that Clive's management provided while also asserting her creative freedom, would she have avoided the chaos that consumed her? These questions have no answers. What we're left with is the music, and particularly the song that represents both Whitney's greatest artistic triumph and the moment she chose to stop being controlled. Every time "I Will Always Love You" plays, we hear a woman at the absolute peak of her vocal powers, singing with complete freedom and raw emotion. We hear the sound of someone choosing themselves over the expectations of powerful men. We hear the moment when Whitney Houston stopped being a product and became an artist. And we hear why that one decision, that one act of defiance, created something so powerful that it will outlast both the woman who sang it and the man who tried to stop her. This story reminds us that sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight for the right to be ourselves. Whitney's stand against Clive Davis wasn't about a song. It was about autonomy, dignity, and the right to use her God-given talent in the way she knew was right. The fact that she was proven spectacularly correct doesn't diminish how much courage it took to stand up to the most powerful man in her professional life. In a world where young artists are still being shaped, packaged, and controlled by record labels and management companies, Whitney's story stands as both inspiration and warning. Trust your instincts. Fight for your vision. But also understand that creative freedom comes with responsibility and that breaking free from structure doesn't always lead to happiness. The song that Clive Davis said would end Whitney's career instead became her signature, her legacy, and proof that authentic artistry can achieve extraordinary commercial success. But the woman who had to fight for the right to sing it paid a heavy price for that victory. As we remember Whitney Houston, we should celebrate both her incredible talent and her courage to finally choose herself, even when the most powerful forces in the music industry told her she was making a mistake. And we should honor her memory by learning from both her triumphs and her struggles. What would you sacrifice to stay true to your creative vision? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story inspired you to think about the balance between mentorship and autonomy, hit that like button and share it with an artist who needs to hear this message. Subscribe and ring that notification bell because we have more stories that reveal the hidden battles behind music's greatest moments and the courage it takes to create art on your own terms. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is no, even to the people who think they know what's best for you.